I live off Gulfton in Houston, in a second-floor one-bedroom with a sagging balcony that faces a parking lot and a crepe myrtle that pretends every June is a parade. On summer nights, you can see the blue glow of the medical center from my stairwell like someone left a TV on across half the city. I'm 34, married to Rosa, and I fix commercial refrigeration for a living, which means my phone rings when other people's food gets warm. Up until last October, emergency meant a walk-in cooler with opinions. Then Rosa's water broke at 24 weeks while we were arguing about whether the crib should be by the window. The ER intake nurse said premature rupture of membranes, and my brain did the thing it does when someone speaks a language I've only heard in movies. They wheeled her down hallways that smelled like lemon and worry. In triage, a resident with shoe covers and a soft voice said, "Magnesium and steroids, and let's try to buy time." Like the hospital kept minutes on a shelf and we just needed to reach them. Time is a currency you don't know you've been spending until the bank calls. They admitted us to a room where machines blinked and hummed their busy little lullabies. A monitor drew mountains from our daughter's heartbeat. At 3 in the morning, the sound changed, down from gallop to a trot to something I hated immediately. Alarms negotiated with each other. A team arrived like a weather front. Scrubs in blues and greens, masks that made their eyes look like the whole story. "We're going to deliver now," someone said. And another someone asked me if I wanted to cut the cord, and I said a word that wasn't yes or no but meant please save her. Our daughter came out the size of my hand, alien and perfect. The room went from loud to reverent. They slipped her into a plastic bag to keep in the heat and slid a hat on her head that looked like it belonged on a doll. A respiratory therapist held a tiny mask to a face that wasn't ready for air and said, "Come on, sweet girl." The NICU team moved with choreography that said they'd practiced 1,000 times for this exact 30 seconds. Someone asked her name. Rosa and I had been arguing over lists for months. "Maya," I said, because the syllables felt like a handle. "Maya," Rosa whispered, and the room accepted it. The elevator to the NICU felt like a portal to a country with different weather. It was bright the way snow is bright. Everywhere. Beeps, whooshes, white bars with weight and feeds written in dry erase. Pumps stacked like a city skyline. They parked Maya in bed space 9 under a blue light and inside a plexiglass box that made my chest tighten. The nurse, Alyssa, name in block letters on her badge, took Rosa's hand and then mine and laid out the map. CPAP to help her breathe, lines in her belly button to give her fluids, a tube to feed until she could remember how to suck and swallow at the same time. "You'll hear a lot of alarms," she said. "Not all of them are an emergency. We'll tell you which ones to hate." The social worker brought forms and a voice like a blanket: parental leave, parking vouchers, Medicaid for infants the size of coffee cups. Someone else handed me a pump kit in a zip bag and told us that Rosa's milk would be medicine. I nodded like a man who had just been promoted to a job he couldn't pronounce. When they finally let me touch Maya, I slid 2 fingers through a little porthole and found her foot. Her skin was translucent, the color of new petals. She pushed back, a pressure that said a person lived there. I cried the complicated cry that doesn't know if it belongs to joy or fear, and the room did not make me pick. That night I walked down to the car, past the statue of the doctor with the outstretched hand, and sat in the parking garage until my legs remembered their job. The city above ground kept doing its Friday night, sirens, laughter, the low freight train moan of a bus on wet pavement. I Googled every word I'd heard. Surfactant, apnea, bradycardia, TPN, kangaroo care. The screen told me everything and nothing. I texted my mother a photo of Maya's hand and my ID bracelet and the words, "She's here." Mom sent back a rosary emoji and Dios con ustedes. God with you. I hoped God liked fluorescent lights and hand sanitizer. I came back upstairs and Alyssa was still there, charting under the dim lamp that tries to make the night shift nap. She said we could hold Maya the next day if she was stable. "Skin to skin," she said like a spell. "She knows you. Your chest is the first room she rented." I didn't sleep. I went home at dawn, stood in our bedroom staring at the crib by the window, and put my hand flat on the mattress like I was checking for a pulse the future hadn't invented yet. The NICU teaches you the grammar of beeping. There's the hey beep, The one that means a line kinked or a sensor lost faith. There's the pay attention beep. Maya forgot to breathe for a 10 count. Rub her foot, whisper, watch numbers climb. There's the everybody moves alarm. Oxygen sat sliding into the 60s. Heart rate a reluctant partner. Respiratory therapist speed walking with a spool of tubing that could moor a boat. By day 3 my ear knew which beep belonged to my daughter. I could hear it under the hallway conversation, under the elevator ding, under the rattle of ice in nurses' cups. Parents all learn this. We carry our kids' frequency around like a second phone. We fell into a schedule that felt like pretending. Days at the hospital, nights at home. I changed my work shifts so I could be there for morning rounds, the parade of coats and scrubs reading numbers like poetry and issuing plans in small doses. Increase feeds by 1 milliliter, the neonatologist would say, and I'd write it down like she'd granted us an acre of land. Rosa pumped every 2 hours like a person keeping a lighthouse lit. The milk freezer outside the unit hummed like a secret. I labeled each bottle with time down to the minute as if Maya would taste 3:17 a.m. and prefer it to 3:21. On day 5 we did kangaroo care. Skin to skin. Maya tucked inside a V of warm blankets against my chest. A tangle of tubes and hope between us. I learned to sit very still. I learned that a 2-pound person can sweat. I learned the way her foot twitched when she wasn't sure she wanted to stay and the way her hand settled like a leaf when she decided yes. Her monitors behaved. Alyssa said, "She likes you." Like she was telling me the weather was improving. I sat for 2 hours until my back begged for mercy and my heart said 30 more minutes. Then the unit had a code. Not Maya. The baby next to us. A boy with a name that sounded like a trumpet. His monitor went wide ugly. The room compressed. The team arrived and moved to a rhythm I recognized from TV but had never heard freestanding. The compressions, the AP, the ventilator reattached, the words that make a corridor shut up. A curtain, then a larger circle of quiet. Alyssa put a hand on our curtain and flattened a wrinkle that didn't matter. "Focus here," she whispered. And I hated her for being good at her job and loved her for placing my gaze somewhere I could survive. Later, the boy's father came out and made a sound I didn't know a throat could make. It followed me home and hid in the silverware drawer. Bills arrived like birds. Some were labeled estimate and some were labeled statement and none were labeled sorry about your luck. The social worker helped us fill out forms for programs with soft names, the kind you don't read without sighing. I took extra service calls because Freon and failure make money when grief does not. I replaced a compressor in a taqueria at 2 a.m. and, when the owner handed me cash, I had to put my hands on the stainless counter to steady myself because the bill in my palm looked like it belonged to another life. My father called from San Antonio and told me about the time I was born early enough to scare him and how the NICU then was a room with lights like a prison and nurses who used rules as medicine. "She'll be stubborn," he said. "That's how we make it." Then he told me I should get right with God. I told him God was busy with oxygen saturations and we could split the difference later. One night I sat in the hospital chapel because the pump room was full. A sign asked me to be silent in 3 languages. Someone had left a paper program from a memorial service on the pew. It had a sketch of tiny footprints and a verse that made me mad. A woman in scrubs came in and cried in that quiet way professionals do. Like they don't want to take up room even with tears. I folded the program in half and then half again and tucked it in my pocket as if not littering could balance any scale. By week 3, we were fluent enough to hear bad news without flinching. A brain scan showed, "A small bleed will watch." A resident said infection workup and antibiotics to be safe, and my chest compressed into a geography I couldn't name. We signed consent for something that put a tube in a place no tube should be. Maya held our fingers like a climber. Alyssa said she liked the sound of cumbia. Her heart rate chills out. And I DJ'd from my phone, quiet enough not to pollute the air but loud enough to pretend the world included bass. The night I almost relapsed was a Thursday. I had 6 years between me and the bottle I used to argue with. Our apartment smelled like pump parts boiling and tortillas warming in a pan. I opened a cabinet looking for Tupperware and found the dusty half of a wedding gift we never used, 2 fancy shot glasses shaped like bad ideas. I stood there and imagined what forgetting would feel like. Then I put the glasses in the trash and texted a guy from my old meeting. He texted back, "Hospital chapel at 9?" 8 of us sat in a circle of chairs with scuffed legs and talked about powerlessness and what surrender looks like when it's attached to a baby we can't fix by trying harder. The Serenity Prayer felt different in a building where people were inventing versions of it every hour. If you live here long enough, you learn the weather carries knives. August arrived heavy, the air outside like hot bread. Inside the NICU, the temperature never changed and the beeps kept doing their reasonable little dance. On a Sunday afternoon, a storm line on my phone looked like it had decided on our neighborhood. The nurse manager said we had good generators. The way people say, "Trust me," right before you notice their tells. I told myself the building was a spaceship and spaceships have backups. I sat down for kangaroo time and felt Maya's breaths like moth wings against my skin. The lightning rolled in low and mean. You could see flashes even with the blinds down. Somewhere 3 floors below us, a transformer forgot its manners. The lights hiccuped, then settled into emergency brightness, the bad white of gymnasiums and horror movies. The beeps faltered, regrouped, became a chorus with slightly different timing. Over the intercom came a woman's voice trying to sound like a parent. "Facility on generator power. All critical areas remain supported." Generators support a lot. They don't love elevators. They don't love air conditioning. They don't love being asked for more than they promised. The unit went from cool to warm in 20 minutes. Babies sweat in places I didn't know babies could sweat. Respiratory came around with water and towels for staff because you can't have careful hands if all your systems are cursing. Then a choked radio call at the desk. "Transport team is staged." The NICU attending spoke to us like a captain. "We're safe here," she said, and then, because honesty is an art, "But if we need to move a few to the children's wing, we'll do it." A technician handed out laminated cards with numbers and instruction lines. Someone taped glow sticks to supply badges. The room grew the kind of quiet where everyone is arranging their next 10 minutes. We didn't have to move Maya. The babies with the least patience for heat went first, ex-chest surgeries, a micropreemie who decided oxygen was optional on Tuesdays, a kid on specialized ventilator settings that made my insides knot. The transport team arrived like a military movie, steady and fast, pushing isolettes that looked like time machines. One RT bagged a baby the size of a sandwich while a nurse counted breaths like a metronome. Parents stood pressed back under exit signs, watching the city move the city. A man down the hall said, "I should be doing something," and a nurse said, "You are, staying out of the way." And her kindness wasn't sarcastic. A respiratory therapist whose name I never caught stopped at our bed space and asked if I could sing. "Anything low and boring," she said, because Maya had started doing that bradycardia/apnea tango she loved to do during thunderstorms. So I sang the only song I know all the words to that isn't a drinking song. "Twinkle, twinkle little star." Slow enough that it became a prayer, low enough that it vibrated more than it actually spoke. Maya's numbers wandered toward okay. I watched the screen more than her face and hated myself for that and kept singing anyway. Somewhere a crash cart skidded. Somewhere a baby coded and came back. And I know that because I saw a nurse cry with her whole face in the supply room and then wash it off with cold water and return to work. For an hour and change, the NICU ran like a ship in a bad sea. Then the power smoothed. The air returned in a sigh you could feel in the floor. And the intercom voice said words that tasted like water. Full power restored. The room, traitor, behaved as if nothing had happened. That night, when I finally drove home, the city was patchy. Neighborhoods dark, others lit like billboards. A Dairy Queen sign blinked apology. At a stoplight, a man with a generator humming in the back of his truck waved me through like he had authority. Our apartment was hot and smelled like the inside of a dryer. I sat on the floor and let the heat make me stupid. When the AC finally kicked, I cried the way heat makes you cry, quietly because you don't have spare water. 2 days later, during rounds, the attending said Maya's belly looked a little more full than I'd like. The unit changed. NICU parents know this, how the temperature of a morning tilts on a phrase. The team moved toward watchful. Alyssa squeezed my arm, her version of a flare, and said, "We may need to rest her gut." That meant stopping feeds, starting TPN again, praying at the altar of bowel rest. They ordered an X-ray. The tech slid a plate under a mattress like a blackjack dealer. The image came back with gas patterns that made the doctor say, "Not scary," while pointing to a place I will never forget. I walked to the parents' bathroom and threw up coffee. That evening, a thunderstorm did its theatrics far away while Houston steamed. I sat by Maya and read her the maintenance manual for a walk-in freezer because it was in my bag and because my voice forgets how to talk if I don't give it something to do. I explained defrost cycles. I explained gaskets and hinges and the way a door knows if it's closed. Maya's chest lifted and fell in time with my small, boring story. On the whiteboard, someone had drawn a star next to her name. People talk about discharge like a finish line. It's a door. It's also a cliff. On day 87, the neonatologist said, "We're going to try room air." Maya kept her sats where the nurses liked them. On day 91, we passed the car seat test, which is the most stressed out hour of a parent's life if their life has been measured in beeps. On day 94, we signed a folder as thick as a textbook and learned how to coil oxygen tubing for a baby who might need it and how to work a home monitor that beeps different than the hospital ones do. Alyssa hugged us and handed me a packet with safe sleep guidelines and a Polaroid of Maya holding the tiniest graduation cap you've ever seen. I put the cap in my pocket like a relic. Home was too quiet. The refrigerator hum sounded like an argument. The air conditioner's click made my heart sprint. We took turns sleeping and then not. The first night, Maya forgot to breathe for 6 seconds and the monitor announced it with a noise that could have been a fire alarm. I picked her up and counted out loud and Rosa shouted to the empty room, "We hear you." We did. We do. The move from they to we is not a single day. There's a community nobody wants to join and everyone is grateful for once they're in. NICU parents trade hacks the way chefs trade knives. Where to get preemie diapers without selling a kidney, which bottles don't lie about flow, how to answer the question, how old? With 2 dates, birthday and adjusted age, without making the grocery line hate you. We started dropping off pump snacks on Sundays, granola bars, jerky, those gummy fruit things that pretend to be health, labeled with dumb jokes because humor on a Post-it is a kind of medicine. Once a month we go with a cart of coffee to Bedspace 9 and its neighbors and say, "We won't stay, we just brought these." And someone always says, "Sit for 5 minutes?" And we do. Maya's follow-ups filled the calendar. Cardiology, the murmur behaved. Ophthalmology, the eyes stayed where they should. Physical therapy, neck like a pelican, hips tight, but look at her fight. We learned how to guesstimate a world in 2-week slices. On good days, she smiled right at my face like it was a new moon. On bad days, I counted her ribs and reminded myself babies don't forget how to grow just because their parents learned to hate numbers. I went back to work full-time. Condensers still clogged. Restaurant managers still promised to call earlier next time and didn't. On mornings when a unit kicked on and blew cold, I'd stand in the doorway and let it wash my arms and think about the generator's purr and how thin the distance is between "we're fine" and "we're not fine." My boss slapped my shoulder and said, "Heard you had a baby?" And I thought about explaining the months of borrowed minutes, but just nodded and said, "She's tough." The thing about trauma is that it changes the rules on ordinary objects. The microwave beep can be a threat. The ice machine's dump can be a flare. At Casa Ramirez on a Thursday, a blender hit a note that made me sit down on the curb outside and breathe like a football coach taught me once. I texted Dr. F from the chapel and she texted back, "Name 5 red things." And I did brick, stop sign, Rosa's shirt, the taqueria awning, blood, then 5 blue things. Then I went back inside and ate my tacos and they tasted like cilantro and not like fear. The day we took Maya to the park by the bayou, a balloon got loose from a birthday party and sailed up. She watched it until her neck got tired. I told her the balloon didn't have lungs and would fall eventually, but the sky would still be there ready to be looked at. She laughed like I was the funniest man in 2 counties, or maybe she had gas. Counted either way. We went to the NICU reunion in June. Parents wheeled strollers with name tags. Nurses wore t-shirts that said, "I grow miracles," and made me roll my eyes and then tear up. Alyssa hugged us and said Maya had her eyebrows, which was a lie designed to make me feel I had contributed. The boy with the trumpet name's mother was there with a table of candles and a photo. People stopped and put hands on the table as they passed like you do at a shrine. She hugged babies that weren't hers with a tenderness that felt like a weather report. Stormy there, clear here, move carefully. At home, on a hot night that smelled like rain on dust, Maya woke at 3 and forgot to remember. The monitor lit up, declared its opinion, and the old NICU instinct roared to the front like a truck. I scooped her and rubbed her feet and sang my stupid star song and counted heartbeats against my wrist. She looked at me like, "Why are you making a big deal?" And then farted, which is humor of the highest order. I put her back down and stared at the ceiling until morning started drawing the edges of our blinds. Here is what I know, which is not a moral so much as a list we taped behind our cabinet door. Wash your hands, use your voice, don't argue with numbers you don't understand. Ask the nurse to explain the beeps until you can sleep through the right ones. Let people bring food and don't pretend this isn't hard. Throw away the fancy shot glasses. Keep the graduation cap. Count breath, not weeks, when the counting gets mean. I am a man in Houston with a toolbox and a daughter who arrived too early and a wife who learned to measure time in ounces. On good days, I can hear the quiet between beeps and it sounds like forgiveness. On bad days, I still listen for alarms in the refrigerator hum. Either way, I put my hand on Maya's back and wait for the rise, and every time it comes I say thank you, small and out loud, like a superstition I plan to keep.